The first time her hand brushed mine, I knew it wasn't an accident. It happened while I was tightening the last screw into the fence panel, sunlight catching on the edges of the wood. She stood close enough that I could feel the soft brush of her sleeve against my arm, close enough that her perfume, warm, subtle, something like jasmine carried by summer air, slipped into my lungs and refused to leave. I looked up, and there she was, her eyes holding mine just a little too long, her lips curved in a knowing smile that made me forget the tool in my hand. Her name was Claire. Mid-40s, poised in a way that made you think she had never once lost her composure, and yet, there was something beneath it. A flicker of vulnerability in her gaze, a question she wasn't ready to ask but desperately wanted answered. And me? I was just the neighbor's son, 20-something, the one who offered to help mend the leaning fence between our yards. But the truth was, the fence was only part of the reason I showed up that morning. The real reason stood in front of me now, a woman whose presence filled the space like music you couldn't ignore. I remember how she tilted her head as she watched me work, her hair falling loosely across her cheek, the sunlight slipping through the strands like threads of fire. Every move I made, I felt her eyes on me. Not in a casual way, but with a quiet intensity that made my pulse thrum louder than the hammering of nails. When I reached for the plank she steadied with her hand, her fingers lingered against mine. Just a second too long. Enough to spark something I wasn't sure either of us could ignore. "You're good with your hands," she said softly, her voice carrying that playful note that felt like it had a second meaning tucked inside it. I tried to answer, but my throat had gone dry. All I could do was nod, pretending to be focused on the wood in front of me when in reality, all I felt was the heat of her standing so close. The air between us shifted then. It wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about the silent stretching between words, the way our shoulders brushed whenever we leaned toward the same spot, the way her breath seemed to pause when mine did. She leaned in, pointing at a crack in the wood. But her hand didn't stop there, it hovered near mine, tracing the grain of the fence as though she was guiding me, though we both knew I didn't need her help. My skin tingled where her knuckles nearly grazed mine, and when I looked up, her eyes were waiting for me, steady, unblinking, as if daring me to look away first. I didn't. Her smile deepened, slow and deliberate. She lowered her voice, her words curling between us like smoke. "Touch the wood again," she murmured, her eyes flicking briefly to my hands, "or touch me instead." The world seemed to narrow in that instant. The hum of cicadas, the creak of the fence, even the warmth of the sun, all of it blurred into the background. There was only her. The way her lips parted just slightly, the rise and fall of her chest, the quiet tension in the space where our hands hovered close enough to bridge the distance. My breath caught. I couldn't tell if she was teasing or daring me, if this was a fleeting spark or the beginning of something neither of us had expected. What I did know was that the choice she had laid before me wasn't about the wood at all. And then, a sharp sound broke the moment. The side gate creaked open, hinges groaning loud enough to shatter the silence. Both of us turned at once, our eyes wide, our faces still lit with the glow of something unspoken, unfinished. Someone was coming. Claire's hand brushed mine once more, quick but unmistakable, before she stepped back just slightly, her composure sliding back into place like a mask. But her eyes told me everything. This wasn't over. The gate slammed shut again, the footsteps fading away as quickly as they had come. Whoever it was hadn't lingered. But the spell between us had already been broken, leaving behind a silence that weighed heavier than before. Claire stood a step away now, her hands smoothing the sides of her dress as if reclaiming composure. Her eyes flicked toward the fence, then back to me, and I caught the smallest sigh slip from her lips. It was almost imperceptible, but it wasn't the sigh of boredom. It was the sigh of someone who had felt something she wasn't sure she was allowed to feel. I bent down to tighten another bolt, trying to act as though my pulse wasn't still hammering from her words, but I could sense her eyes on me again. Always watching. Always close. You know, she said after a moment, her tone softer, my husband used to promise he'd fix this fence years ago. He never did. The air shifted. That was the first time she had mentioned him, and her voice carried a faint ache, though not sharp, more like an old bruise. I glanced up, careful not to let curiosity turn into pity. You're not together anymore? I asked gently. She gave a small, almost rueful smile. No. Haven't been for a while. We divorced, 5 years ago. He was gone long before that, though. The house stayed. The fence stayed. I stayed. There was something in the way she said it, as though she hadn't just been talking about wood and nails. I nodded, tightening the screw until the wood groaned. Sometimes things hold on even when they're falling apart. She looked at me then, really looked, and I felt her gaze press against me like a hand on my chest. I wasn't sure what she saw, but her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, then closed again. It struck me in that moment that she wasn't the flawless, untouchable woman I had always imagined from a distance. She was human. A little lonely. A little tired of being strong all the time. And me? I wasn't sure what role I was stepping into, the helpful neighbor, the friend, or something far more dangerous. I forced myself to focus on the task, but every detail of her distracted me. The way her fingers traced the edge of the fence absent-mindedly, nails painted a pale color that caught the sunlight. The way her shoulder brushed mine when she leaned in to look at the work. The warmth of her breath when she spoke close to my ear, unintentionally intimate, sending a shiver I tried desperately to hide. You shouldn't waste your afternoon on this, she said softly, though she didn't move away. Her voice hovered near my skin, and I felt it more than I heard it. I don't mind, I answered, glancing at her before I could stop myself. Her face was inches from mine, close enough to count the faint freckles across her cheek, close enough that I had to remind myself to breathe. She didn't back away. Instead, her hand rested lightly on my shoulder, almost casual, but it lingered too long to be meaningless. I froze under her touch, caught between wanting to lean into it and knowing how dangerous that would be. Her eyes softened, but then she pulled back, her fingers slipping away like a secret. The absence of her touch felt louder than the touch itself. This is risky, she murmured, almost to herself. I wanted to ask what she meant, the age difference, the neighbors who might whisper, the line we both knew existed, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I said quietly, doesn't mean it's wrong. For the briefest moment, I thought she might answer. Instead, she smiled faintly, as if I'd surprised her, then looked down at the wood grain under her hand. The afternoon light slanted lower, painting golden lines across her hair, across the fence we stood against, across the narrowing distance between us. Neither of us moved, but something shifted anyway, a silent understanding, fragile but undeniable. Her hand returned, not to the fence this time, but to rest lightly against the back of mine. Just the weight of her fingertips, nothing more. But it was enough. Enough to make the air between us hum again, enough to tell me that whatever this was, she felt it too. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence itself had become our language, the weight of her fingertips on mine lingered long after she pulled her hand away. It was nothing more than a touch, innocent, explainable, yet my body felt charged, like lightning had brushed through my veins. She stepped back, smoothing her dress again, but the look in her eyes betrayed her composure. It wasn't indifference. It was something else. Something neither of us had the courage to name out loud. Can you hold this plank steady, she asked, her voice steadier than mine would have been. I nodded, moving closer. Too close. My chest nearly brushed her shoulder as we worked side by side. I could smell her perfume again, not overpowering, just faint and maddening. My hand steadied the wood, but my focus wasn't on the fence. It was on her hand, centimeters from mine. On the curve of her neck, the soft skin revealed when the breeze shifted her hair. On the quiet inhale she took when I leaned a little too near. Seconds stretched. My heart was beating loud enough that I wondered if she could hear it. And then, a voice called from the other side of the yard. "Claire. You home?" We froze. Her neighbor's voice carried easily over the fence, and panic flickered across her face before she caught it, replacing it with a carefully neutral expression. I let go of the plank, my hand suddenly awkward, but she pressed a finger lightly against my wrist. "Don't move," she whispered, eyes sharp. Footsteps approached. The latch on the gate rattled once, then again, but stayed shut. Her neighbor muttered something about dropping by later, and the sound of retreating steps finally faded. Only then did she release a breath. I realized she was still touching my wrist, her pulse quick against her skin. Neither of us spoke. The silence roared louder than any words. When she finally let go, her eyes met mine, wide, searching, as though asking if I understood just how fragile this line was. I swallowed. That was close. She gave a quick laugh, though it didn't reach her eyes. Too close. The fence forgotten, she turned slightly, and I found myself facing her fully. Her hand rested against the wood, but her body leaned just enough toward mine that the distance felt intentional, a dare. I shouldn't have. But my eyes dropped to her lips before I could stop myself. She noticed. Her breath hitched. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Just the rhythm of silence, broken only by the faint sounds of cicadas in the trees. My hand lifted instinctively, almost without my permission, hovering inches from her arm. If I reached a little further, I could touch her. Draw her closer. Taste the answer to the question that had been burning between us since the first moment her hand brushed mine. Her eyes softened. She tilted her head slightly, the way someone does right before they close the distance. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. And then her phone buzzed. The sound jolted us both back into the present. She fumbled for it quickly, as though the interruption was a lifeline, though I caught the flush of her cheeks, the regret flickering in her eyes before she looked away. "Sorry," she murmured, scanning the screen. Her voice was quieter now, uneven. "My sister. She worries." I nodded, though my hands curled into fists at my sides, frustrated by the cruel timing. She set the phone aside without answering, but the spell had shifted. Not broken, but changed. There was more weight now, more danger. "This is wrong," she whispered suddenly, almost too low to hear. The words cut, but not because I disagreed. Because I knew she didn't truly believe them. If it were wrong, she wouldn't have lingered. If it were wrong, her hand wouldn't still tremble slightly where it rested against the fence. Then why does it feel like the only thing that's right? The words slipped out before I could stop them. She looked at me sharply, her lips parting, her eyes wide. For a heartbeat, I thought she might answer. For a heartbeat, I thought she might close the distance we both kept circling around. But instead, she turned, her hand grazing mine one last time as she reached for the tools. A brush of skin, deliberate enough to say, "Not yet. But soon." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything we hadn't said, everything we almost did. And in that silence, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the time the last plank was set in place, the sun had begun to dip low, painting the yard in molten gold. Shadows stretched long across the grass, and the heat of the day softened into something warmer, more intimate. The fence stood straighter than it had in years, but it wasn't the wood that held my attention. It was her. Claire leaned against the post, her hand resting on the fresh grain, her other brushing a strand of hair away from her cheek. She looked tired, but not in the way that begged for rest. It was the kind of tired that came from carrying more than anyone should have to, from holding herself together for too long. "You've done more in one afternoon than he managed in 10 years, she said, her voice quiet, tinged with something I couldn't quite name. I swallowed. "I didn't do it for the fence." The words slipped out before I could catch them. Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp, startled, then softened as though she'd been waiting to hear them all along. She pushed away from the post, closing the space between us in slow, unhurried steps. My chest tightened with every inch. By the time she stood in front of me, close enough that I could see the faint freckles along the bridge of her nose, my resolve was unraveling. "This is dangerous," she whispered, though she didn't move back. Her hand rose, almost tentative, brushing sawdust from my shirt. Her fingers lingered against my chest, light, cautious, but present. I caught her wrist gently, holding it in place. "So stop me." Her lips parted. No words came. The silence between us pulsed, hot and electric. I could hear her breathing, shallow, uneven, and I realized mine matched. Her perfume clung to the air between us, her warmth pulling me closer until I wasn't sure whose gravity held more power, mine or hers. "Do you know what people would say?" she murmured, her voice trembling for the first time. "I'm twice your age. I've lived a life you haven't even begun. They'd call it foolish, selfish, desperate." Her words should have pushed me back, but instead they drew me in. I reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. My knuckles grazed her cheek, and the soft catch of her breath told me she felt it just as much as I did. "Let them talk," I said, my voice low, meant only for her. "They don't know what it feels like. They don't know this." She closed her eyes for a moment, as though steadying herself. When they opened again, they shimmered with something raw, fear, longing, and an ache that had been waiting too long to be answered. Her hand slid from my chest to my shoulder, gripping lightly, grounding herself. "You don't understand. I can't lose control like this." "Then don't control it," I whispered, stepping closer until our bodies nearly touched. My forehead dipped toward hers, just enough to feel the warmth of her skin without closing the gap. "Just this once." Her lips were inches from mine now. The world had gone utterly still. The cicadas, the wind, the creak of the fence, all of it faded until there was nothing but the rush of blood in my ears and the trembling anticipation between us. I felt her lean, just slightly. Enough to tell me she wanted this too, no matter what words she had spoken. My hand slid up her arm, slow, deliberate, until it rested at the curve of her neck. Her pulse raced beneath my fingers, wild and unrestrained. "Say it," I breathed, my mouth hovering dangerously close to hers. Her eyes locked on mine, wide and desperate. "I can't," she whispered. But her body betrayed her, swaying imperceptibly toward me, her grip tightening on my shoulder. We stood there, caught on the knife's edge of something that couldn't be undone. One more breath, one more second, and the line we'd both been circling would vanish forever. And then, the sound of a car door slammed in the driveway. She flinched, her body jerking back as though burned. My hand fell to my side, the moment shattered, but the taste of it lingered, sharp and intoxicating. Her eyes darted toward the house, then back to me, filled with panic and something else, regret. Desire. Fear. "This isn't finished," she said, her voice barely audible, before turning quickly, her hand brushing mine one last time as she pulled away. I stood frozen, breathless, every nerve still alive with what almost happened. It wasn't a kiss. But it was everything a kiss could have been, and more. The slam of the car door faded into the quiet hum of the neighborhood, but its echo clung to us, vibrating in the silence we didn't dare break. Claire's back was to me, her hand pressed to the fence as though holding herself upright. I could see the slight tremor in her shoulders, the way her breath came in sharp, shallow pulls. When she finally turned, her composure had slipped. Her eyes, usually steady and unreadable, now burned with something raw, fear, anger, and beneath it all, desire she could no longer disguise. "I thought we were careful," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Careful?" I stepped closer, my voice low, my pulse still pounding from the moment we had nearly crossed the line. "Claire, we didn't even, that's not the point," she cut in quickly, her voice tightening. Her hands twisted together, betraying the calm she tried to hold. "Do you know what they'll say if anyone thinks?" She stopped, biting down on the words. I moved closer, close enough that her hands brushed mine when she dropped them to her sides. "If anyone thinks what?" Her silence said everything. For a long beat, neither of us moved. Then, with a sharp breath, she confessed, "My sister. She saw us yesterday. She didn't say a word at the time, but she called me last night." Her gaze lifted, catching mine with an intensity that pinned me in place. "She thinks you're too young. That I'm reckless. That I should know better." The words hit harder than I expected, but not because of her sister's judgment. It was the guilt in Claire's voice, the way her throat tightened around the admission. I tried to speak, but she was already stepping back, shaking her head as though trying to clear the air between us. I told her she was wrong. That there was nothing between us. That you were just helping with the fence. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, as though she knew how thin that lie sounded. I stared at her, the truth of it cutting deep. She hadn't just lied to her sister, she had lied to herself. And now that lie hung between us like barbed wire, making every step closer more dangerous, every silence heavier. "Did you mean it?" My voice came out rough, my throat tight. Her eyes widened, her lips parting in protest, but no sound came. She didn't answer. Instead, she brushed past me, the soft fabric of her dress grazing my arm as she moved toward the tools. The contact was fleeting, but my whole body reacted, straining toward her as if it had a will of its own. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the hammer, holding it too tightly. She set it down again, then turned sharply, closing the distance she'd just created. "No," she said at last, her voice fierce and trembling all at once. "No, I didn't mean it." The confession landed between us like a spark in dry grass. My chest tightened, my breath caught, and before I could speak, she pressed forward until we were inches apart. "I told her there was nothing," she whispered, her eyes locked to mine, "but I can't keep pretending. I feel it every time you look at me. Every time you stand too close. Every time I try to step away and, God help me, I don't want to." Her hand lifted, hovering at my jaw. It didn't touch, but the heat of it was enough to set my skin on fire. I caught her wrist gently, guiding it closer until her palm rested against my cheek. She closed her eyes at the contact, her breath unsteady. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of her breathing, the trembling of her hand, the impossible nearness of her lips. But then she pulled back suddenly, her hand falling away. "If she tells anyone, if anyone suspects," her words broke off. I saw the war in her eyes, the pull toward me against the fear of what it would cost her. I took a step forward, refusing to let the space grow between us. "So what do we do?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she lifted her chin, her eyes blazing with both fear and hunger. "We stop lying to ourselves," she said finally, her voice low, breathless. The air around us trembled with the weight of her words. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a touch. But it was a decision. One that would push us past the point of no return. The words we stopped lying to ourselves still echoed in the air, vibrating through me like a chord struck too hard. Claire stood only a step away, her chest rising and falling unevenly, her eyes bright and unguarded. She had spoken the truth, and now there was no taking it back. The evening light dipped lower, wrapping us in a softer, more secret glow. The world seemed to have hushed, holding its breath as if it too waited for what would come next. I took a slow step forward. She didn't move away. Our bodies hovered close, the thin space between us charged, dangerous, alive. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the faint tremor in her breath each time she exhaled. "You know what this means," she whispered, her voice barely more than a tremble. "That we're done pretending," I said. Her lips parted, but no answer came. Instead, her hand rose again, brushing lightly against my shoulder, sliding down the curve of my arm until her fingers rested on my wrist. The touch was small, tentative, yet it carried all the weight of a confession. "I'm scared," she admitted, her words catching. "Of them. Of myself. Of what this could turn into." I leaned closer, my forehead nearly touching hers, my voice low and steady. "So am I. But I'd rather risk everything than lose this moment." Her breath shivered across my lips. She closed her eyes, as though surrendering to gravity itself, and for the first time she didn't pull back. My hand found her waist, hesitant at first, then sure as I felt the quick, racing beat of her heart beneath my palm. She leaned into it, her body fitting against mine like it belonged there all along. The air thickened around us, heavy with all the words we hadn't said, all the desire we hadn't dared to touch. Her hair brushed my cheek, soft and electric. My other hand rose, brushing the strand away from her face, fingers grazing her skin. She shivered beneath the touch, tilting her head into my palm as though she had been waiting for it. "Tell me to stop," I whispered. "And I will." Her eyes opened then, locking onto mine, fierce and vulnerable at once. "Don't stop." The words hit me like a spark, burning through every hesitation, every fear. The last thread of restraint snapped. I closed the distance. Our lips met, soft at first, hesitant, as though we both needed to be sure this was real. Then deeper, hungrier, the kiss pulling every buried thought, every stolen glance, every trembling near touch into one undeniable truth. Her hand slid to my neck, clinging as though afraid I might vanish, and I held her tighter, anchoring us both in a moment that had been waiting far too long. The world outside ceased to exist. There was no fence, no neighbors, no judgments, only the heat of her against me, the taste of her breath, the way she melted and resisted all at once, torn between fear and surrender. When we finally broke apart, breathless, her forehead rested against mine. Her eyes shone, glassy with unshed tears she didn't try to hide. "This changes everything," she whispered. I cupped her face gently, brushing my thumb along her cheek. "No," I said, my voice steady. "It only makes clear what's always been here." Her laugh broke through then, soft, shaky, threaded with relief. She leaned into my hand, her eyes closing. For the first time, she didn't look away, didn't guard herself. She let me see her, the fear, the longing, the hope she thought she had buried. And in that quiet, golden hour glow, clarity settled over us both. There would be consequences. Whispers. Judgment. Maybe even regret. But there would also be this, the truth of us, undeniable and alive. We had crossed the line. And neither of us wanted to go back. The kiss lingered on my lips long after it ended, as if the air itself refused to let it go. We stood there, pressed close in the fading light, both of us breathing hard, both of us realizing there was no going back. Claire's hand was still on my chest, fingers curled lightly into my shirt, as though she wasn't quite ready to release me. Her eyes searched mine, not with the guarded hesitation I'd seen so often, but with an openness that felt fragile and brave all at once. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet hum of the evening filled the silence, the chirp of crickets, the soft creak of the fence we'd rebuilt, the faint breeze stirring through the leaves. Ordinary sounds, against which our world had shifted into something extraordinary. Finally, she exhaled a shaky laugh. "I can't believe I let this happen." I covered her hand with mine, steadying it against my chest. "You didn't let it happen," I said softly. "We did." Her gaze held mine. There was still fear there, but also something new, a softness, a release, a surrender. She leaned into me then, her forehead resting lightly against my shoulder. The weight of her, warm and real, sent a calm through me I hadn't expected. "I've spent years convincing myself I don't need this," she murmured. "That wanting someone, needing someone, it only leads to hurt. I thought I was safer on my own." I tightened my arm around her, pulling her closer. "Maybe safer," I admitted. "But not happier." Her silence was answer enough. We stayed like that for a while, just holding each other in the dimming light. Every second, I could feel her defenses slipping, piece by piece, until all that remained was the truth neither of us could ignore anymore. When she finally pulled back, her hands slid down my arms, tracing the length of them until her fingers found mine. She laced them together without hesitation this time, squeezing lightly as if testing the strength of something new. Her smile was small, tentative, but it was real. "You make me feel younger. Not in years. In spirit. Like I haven't missed my chance." I smiled back, brushing my thumb along the back of her hand. "Maybe you were just waiting for the right moment." She tilted her head, studying me with that sharp, steady gaze I'd come to know. "Or the right person." The way she said it, low, quiet, certain, sent a warmth through me deeper than any touch. I leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, lingering there as her hand tightened in mine. She sighed softly, the sound of someone finally allowing themselves to rest, to trust. The age gap, the fear of gossip, the hesitation, they were still there, shadows that would follow us into tomorrow. But standing there, our hands entwined, our foreheads touching, those shadows felt smaller. Manageable. Worth facing, as long as we faced them together. I pulled her close again, arms wrapped around her, and this time she held me back with no restraint. Her cheek pressed to my chest, her heartbeat matching mine. The fence, the tools, the setting sun, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was this, the quiet certainty that what we'd found wasn't a mistake, but a beginning. "I don't know where this goes," she whispered into my shirt. "But I want to find out. With you." My chest tightened with something fierce and tender all at once. I kissed the top of her head, my lips brushing her hair. "That's all I need." We stayed like that as the first stars began to pierce the sky, two people who had finally stopped pretending, finally stepped into something real. Whatever tomorrow brought, we would face it together. And for the first time in years, both of us believed it was possible.